Abbey Road is the Beatles' triumphant last return to the recording studio after recording Let It Be. With songs like Come Together, Something, Oh Darling, I Want You, and Here Comes the Sun, this album is one of the most beloved records ever made and holds a special place in the hearts of Beatles fans all over the world. Today, we're going to show you 10 very interesting facts about the Beatles' Abbey Road. Let's do this. Although Let It Be is the official last Beatles record released, Abbey Road is the final album the Beatles recorded. Many people believe that the group knew the end was near and therefore made an effort to come together and create a swan song album. However, every single Beatle has since denied knowing this would be the last album. George Martin looks back on the feelings in the recording studio. He says, "Nobody knew for sure that it was going to be the last album, but everybody felt it was. The Beatles had gone through so much and for such a long time. They'd been incarcerated with each other for nearly a decade, and I was surprised that they had lasted as long as they did. I wasn't at all surprised they split up because they all wanted to lead their own lives, and I did too. It was a release for me as well." Before being titled Abbey Road, this final album had a different name, Everest. That name was inspired by the brand of cigarettes sound engineer Geoff Emerick smoked. The Beatles liked the imagery of the silhouette of Mount Everest depicted on the pack. Paul says, "While we were in the studio, our engineer Geoff Emerick always used to smoke cigarettes called Everest, so the album was going to be called Everest. We never really liked that, but we couldn't think of anything else to call it. Then one day I said, I've got it. I don't know how I thought of it. Abbey Road. It's the studio we're in, which is fabulous, and it sounds a bit like a monastery." Funny enough, engineer John Kurlander recalls a more lazy reason for the name, saying, "It was around July when it was very hot outside that someone mentioned the possibility of the four of them taking a private plane over the foothills of Mount Everest to shoot the cover photograph. But as they became more enthusiastic to finish the LP, someone, I don't remember whom, suggested, look, I can't be bothered to schlep all the way over to the Himalayas for a cover. Why don't we just go outside, take the photo there, call the LP Abbey Road, and have done with it?" That's my memory of why it became Abbey Road. Because they couldn't be bothered to go to Tibet and get cold. It's hard to know the actual truth, but that kind of candid, flippant reasoning just seems so Beatles to me. Oh dear, George Harrison's Something is truly a remarkably gorgeous song, even being heralded as the best love song ever written by Frank Sinatra. John, Paul, and Ringo adore George's masterpiece, all of them calling it the high point of the album. John Lennon most notably and succinctly calling it, quote, about the best track on the album. As we well know, Paul is a man who can put the time in and work. That's just a fact. And for Oh Darling, he wanted it to sound as though he'd been performing on stage for a week. He says, "I mainly remember wanting to get the vocal right, wanting to get it good. I tried it with a hand mic. I tried it with a standing mic. I tried it every which way, and finally got the vocal I was reasonably happy with. It's a bit of a belter, and if it comes off a little bit lukewarm, then you've missed the whole point. It was unusual for me. I would normally try all the goes at a vocal in one day." And John's response was interesting. John says, "Oh Darling was a great one of Paul's that he didn't sing too well. I always thought that I could have done it better. It was more my style than his. He wrote it, so what the hell? He's going to sing it. If he'd had any sense, he would have let me sing it." Dude, Paul was getting roasted, Jesus. And sadly, none of the Beatles enjoyed Paul's Maxwell Silver Hammer. Like, they couldn't stand it. And for this interesting fact, I see no better moment than to bring back, by popular demand, the Beatles Bunch.
The Beatles Bunch, the Beatles Bunch, and what they all thought of Paul's new song.
That's Paul. I hate it. Because all I remember is the track. He made us do it 100 million times. He did everything to make it into a single, and it never was, and it never could have been, but he put guitar licks on it and had somebody hitting an iron pieces, and we spent more money on that song than any of them in the whole album, I think. Sometimes Paul would make us do these really fruity songs. I mean, my God, Maxwell's Silver Hammer was so fruity. After a while, we did a good job on it, but when Paul got an idea or an arrangement in his head, the worst session ever was Maxwell's Silver Hammer. It was the worst track we ever had to record. It went on for fucking weeks. I thought it was mad. They got annoyed because Maxwell's Silver Hammer took 3 days to record. Big deal. Originally, Her Majesty was between Mean Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam, but Paul didn't like it there, so he chucked it. However, through a series of fortunate events, engineer John Kurlander, who is instructed to never throw anything away, put it at the end of the song, The End. When Paul heard it there, he liked it in that context, and that's why it's a nice secret little track. Let It Be certainly had its ups and downs and put pressure on everyone involved. And keep in mind, George Martin was a grown man. He wasn't in his late 20s. So when they were carrying on like they tended to carry on, he just didn't want to deal with it. But Paul pleaded with him, and George agreed with the condition that he had complete control in the studio, like in the old days. Along with Ringo's incredible drum solo in the song The End, of course he had to be convinced because Ringo despises drum solos, this is the only Beatles song to feature a solo by every member. It was basically a musical battle between John, Paul, and George on the guitar over Love You in the background. One of my favorite quotes about the Beatles actually comes from Geoff Emerick about this awesome event. Geoff says, "The idea for guitar solos was very spontaneous, and everybody said, yes, definitely. Well, except for George, who was a little apprehensive at first, but he saw how excited John and Paul were, so he went along with it. Truthfully, I think they rather liked the idea of playing together, not really trying to outdo one another per se, but engaging in some real musical bonding. Yoko was about to go into the studio with John. This was commonplace by now, and he actually told her, 'No, not now. Let me do this. It'll just take a minute.' That surprised me a bit. Maybe he felt like he was returning to his roots with the boys. Who knows?" John really didn't like the medley on the album, preferring to have his song on one side of the album and Paul's on the other. John says, "I like the A side. I never liked that sort of pop opera on the other side. I think it's junk. It was just bits of songs thrown together. I can't remember what some of it is. Come Together is all right, and some things on it. It was a competent album, like Rubber Soul, in a way. It was together in that way, but it had no life, really." As a fan of music, it's really hard to hear things like that, isn't it? I respect his opinion, but it's not easy to hear an artist you love dislike their own music, because personally, I adore the medley. I've always thought it was such a cool Beatles thing to do. What do you think? Abbey Road is one of the Beatles' finest, most beloved records. It was a smash hit and a massive inspiration to musicians around the world, as not only a collection of songs, but the embodiment of the Beatles and who they were and where they were going. It led to an untold number of parodies of the boys crossing that fateful street, and even led to a live webcam you can watch now of people walking, posing, and celebrating good music with each step. I can't help but get a little misty-eyed when I think about the lyrics in the song The End. Almost like a goodbye, but a mantra. I've been repeating it since I was a child when I first heard the song. And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. That's not just good music. That's a message that should be shared anywhere it can be. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.